Okay, perfect. Very good. So again, once again, my name's Taryn, and I live here in Peachtree City. Um, that's another question. Who lives here in Peachtree City right now, or nearby too? Okay, great, good. So I'm fairly new to Peachtree City once again. Just to tell you a little bit about myself real quick before we jump into it. Approximately 30 years ago, I lived here. Was anybody living here about 30 years ago besides me? Maybe close to it. Okay, almost. So I was here and I was in elementary school growing up for a few years because originally I'm from abroad, Seoul, Korea to be exact. So I'm from all over. We moved all around, moved from here to Korea, back, and then once again relocating, and then back once again to Peachtree City in the mid 2000s, where I was a personal trainer at that point, working at some of the fitness centers around this area. And then most recently, after I finished graduate school and obtained a performance psychology degree, I decided to relocate back here once again to Peachtree City last year and pretty much just start my brand and my business. So I was really excited and grateful to be able to come out because I was asked approximately, I don't know, a few months ago to come out and speak about exercise and mindful health. And I feel very strong and passionate about that because that's what I do for a living. I work with people on both physical fitness and mindful health. In other words, trying to help people live longer and pain-free and enjoy life. Does all that sound like something that we could all use and benefit? And on the flip side, after coming out of this pandemic of the last 3 years, let me ask some other yes or no questions. Has anybody experienced any stress at all by any chance from COVID-19? Maybe just few of us in here, maybe some people watching. Um, we learned a lot of change and adjustment, I'm sure, right? Probably, if anything, we learned how to pivot and just move around and just try to adjust to a lot of different foreign ideas, concepts, and just different things that we would take in. And a lot of that had to do with physical fitness, physical activity. And so with physical fitness, which is so important to me, it's a fundamental philosophical establishment of what I've done for a very long time right now. That's what I do with working with people, trying to get people to feel better and get in better shape. And so if that sounds good, when we jump into this presentation, a big part of what I'm going to be spending a lot of time on is how exercise can improve brain function. We've probably heard that before. Some of us have seen studies and read articles in the benefits of how physical activity promotes brain function and optimal health. So that's nothing new that probably any one of us could understand. But what is exercise psychology? We've heard of mind over matter, brain over brawn. What percentage of our mind, our brain controls our physical activity? Well, the definition, and again, we'll jump into this when we talk about the psychology part of it, but the primary function of the brain, as we all know, is movement. The brain controls us into working every day in our daily activities to get here, to have a seat, to take notes, to listen, to memorize and remember some of the stats that we might go over and some of the data that we're going to be learning. All of that's so important and crucial, and it all goes to the brain. But it's not just a one-way street. As we know, you can flip it around, and when you exercise, the brain likes that. It feeds on that. It's kind of nutrition, in other words, of whenever you're learning activity, like, for example, Sudoku and puzzles and what have you, but also going out for exercising, enjoying the beautiful weather, meeting with people, and just doing anything that's engaging, because we're all creatures of habit. We all like to get it together into a social setting and to do activities together. That's what we were meant to be as humans. So let's talk about the two basic forms of exercise, of physical fitness and activity. We have two different components here, aerobic and anaerobic. And some of the exercise examples that you see on the board, I'm sure a lot of us in this room have probably done every single thing in here. Let me ask by show of hands, aerobic meaning things that are with oxygen, implied by the word itself, jogging, biking. Who in here does any form of aerobics during the week at all? Okay, good. And then anaerobic, for example, like strength training, anything without oxygen. Anybody in here go to the local gym or do anything on their own just to do resistance training exercises and such? Good, good, excellent. All of that's so important, we know, because with exercise and improving mindful health, the aerobic and anaerobic are two primary functions of what we need to do and develop and to consistently on a basis be able to employ in our day-to-day operation of activities. Does all that make sense so far? Okay, good, good. As we're going through too, I'll ask for a lot of different examples too, because we just spoke about, a few minutes ago, how the pandemic the last 3 years, we had to adjust to different things. You remember back around March 2020 when everything shut down, that included fitness centers, and that probably included a lot of other activities that we're used to doing. That really changed our lives to where we couldn't do things that we normally were doing on an everyday basis. And again, in my world, that was the fitness centers closing down because we had to, again, we didn't know what we were dealing with about 3 years ago. And so when that happened, what changed is that people had to learn and develop new ways of burning calories and managing their stress level. Because again, I use myself for example. This is the number one reason why I exercise. As I have gone through life, is just learning that the main reasons why people exercise, everybody's all over the place in terms of what their priorities are. Some people might exercise because they want to look better. Some people might want to exercise because they want to feel better. Some people do it for their health. Others do it for psychological benefits. And on the flip side, I don't know if anybody can relate to this, but if you don't get your regular exercise, anybody in here feel kind of grumpy or negative when that does happen? Yeah, right? And there's a definite physical and psychological reason and the why, which we'll jump into why that happens. And that's really important to know too, because it's important to recognize what's not good for us so that way we can learn from those habits as we avoid some of the bad habits that we know that we shouldn't do. For example, sitting. Sitting is the new smoking, is what they say now, right? Yeah, exactly. That's a great example of what we should be doing, because too much during the day we are sitting, whether it be driving in traffic or at the couch watching Netflix or whatever, anything. And so a lot of studies will suggest that we, as in our society, do sit down too much. And that's why I like your example. If you don't mind, would you do that one more time, please, to a full sit to stand? Thank you very much. I appreciate it. That's an excellent example of what needs to be done more regularly. How about, can everybody in here try that just one time, a sit to stand? Very simple sit to stand one time, and then back down. Good, good, good. There you go. I hear some good groans and moans. So when we do that, you notice a few things. Laughter, I see a lot of smiling, probably like an icebreaker in some ways, right? We feel like, wow, that felt really good. The reason it does is because, again, our brain was meant to move, and we were not meant to sit all day and to be, again, sedentary. So I will have some goals for you at the very end when we finish the presentation. But one of the things that I'll definitely implore everybody in here is to try to do that more often. And feel free to do it while I'm talking too. Again, there's different examples that some of my clients, and again, I bet everyone in here can share too. But just to use myself as an example to throw that out there, when I'm working with clients and I don't see them during the week, I'm always telling them, when I'm not here, do something. For example, if they're watching television and there's a commercial break, what do I ask them to do probably? Anybody in here can guess? Right, exactly. Something like that. Absolutely, yeah. And so that's so important. There's other things that people can do that we've been conditioned in the last several decades. Unfortunately, technology can be a good thing, let's face it, but on the flip side, this right here I've got, to go to each slide, I'm doing that, versus what I should be doing, as a good example, is to walk over and hit the arrow key, but I'm just doing this for convenience. But when you go to the grocery store, right? When you go to the gym, it's funny, I see this all the time. There'll be a line of cars waiting to fight over the closest spot to the entrance of the fitness center, right? Same thing with the grocery store, anywhere we're going. And that's just common sense, because we're a society in this country, and again, not to go off a huge tangent, but we know that that's, for the most part, a lot of us are just impulse, fast convenience. Everything is just right now. I need this immediately, no time to waste. And I think that's part of the mindset too, where we can kind of just be a little bit more patient and work on things like parking further away, taking the stairs whenever possible. Anything that we could do to, again, just throw in some extra calories burned during the day will really help out a lot. Does that make sense too? I mean, yeah. And so let's talk about then some of these things up here, the excuses, right? Who in here, by looking at this list, can you relate to at least one? And don't be shy, because I'll raise my hand. I'll raise both for a lot of them for myself, okay? Reasons why we shouldn't exercise. Or I should say excuses, right? That's what they really are, not exercise. But having said that, I'm not going to pick on anybody or pick on these excuses, by the way, because I believe that some of these are legitimate. I mean, no question about it. Don't get me wrong. Yes, we do have a lot of time in the day, but it does get away from us. And some of these, just pick any. I believe that, some of them are very, very legitimate, especially maybe for the women on this bottom one, but not for us guys in here, though, but as far as reapplying makeup. But, where you get with your examples of when people talk about excuses, again, I'll use a lot of examples of myself, of my clients. I'll hear this all the time. I'll have a session booked to meet somebody, and either they don't show up or they call late, I can't make it. I'm sorry, it was such a beautiful day. And I tell them, like, yeah, you're right, just enjoy the beautiful day. Or if it's just pouring down rain, the same thing, I'm sorry, I can't make it today, the weather's crying. Yeah, and I'm like, yeah, you're right, it is kind of dangerous. But for every excuse, there's also a solution. So if we look at this list right here, and maybe someone can help me out. If there's someone in this room can just look at one of these, and there's no wrong answer, by the way, because you're probably going to know a better answer than me. If you were to pick one, can I have somebody just pick one and maybe tell me what is a solution to one of these problems up here? Anybody? If not, it's okay. I can. Yes, ma'am, please.
I can give you one for all of them except for makeup.
I love it. Bingo.
It's too expensive. It's not too expensive because you don't have to do anything. You could actually sit on your bed and put your legs up and down, arms up and so.
Perfect.
No such thing as expensive. Number 3, should I go on?
Tell you what, you come up here. I could learn a lot from you and probably the rest of you because, again, what you're telling me is what I've learned. You're absolutely right, by the way. And thank you again. Wonderful job. You were just annihilating every single one of these. And pretty much what you were doing, did you already see? No, I'm joking. This is the solution slide right here. But what you were saying is absolutely right. No question about it. I'll use myself again as an example. A long time ago, when I first started my own business, when you are an entrepreneur, you probably understand that it's hard to say no. And in my case, it was hard for me to decline clients or take work. I would be all over Atlanta accepting clients. It was crazy when I look at what I used to do. And what I would do, unfortunately, one of the first priorities that I cut off of my calendar, anybody can guess what I'm about to say, what I wouldn't do in my own day, would be to exercise for myself. It's terrible. But what I've learned now over time is that now, again, using what I do, I have my phone and I book my workouts for myself, my exercise sessions for my own calendar, and it's sacred. Nobody can touch it. I share my open live calendar with all my clients. When they want to book a session or meet with me, they can look and they'll see that time that I have secured is not available. I used to, when they would say, I really need that time, I used to say, okay, yeah, you're right. But I don't do that anymore. It's so important to prioritize. You're right. And again, getting back to your first example, I love that. Going to bed early. There's no question about that. Yes, we have 24 hours in a day, but if you go to bed even 30 minutes earlier, what can you do with 30 minutes extra time that next day, right? Toss and turn, yeah. And that's one of the, I have a presentation on sleep management. I hope they invite me to come back and do that because I'd love to share that one because that's an important one, is sleep hygiene for sure. But tailgating on that, all of this too, the solutions with exercise, we'll jump into this too, definitely promotes and helps sleep as well too, as you probably know. Sleep hygiene is extremely highly correlated with how our physical fitness activity and regimen is. So again, wonderful job with helping out with a lot of these. So I really appreciate your help with some of these. You see the Create Smart Goals. It's an acronym. Does anybody know the acronym for SMART for goals? That's okay. It's probably fairly recent concept in the last whatever in terms of academics and learning skills with goals. So we have goals that are specific, and if you Google this, it'll come right up, so you don't have to remember, but specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and timely, basically. So basically, you want to be specific, you want to be very focused on that goal. And somewhere on here it says to write it down, right? A lot of people know that with goals you should write them down so you can see them. Some people write them down and put it on their refrigerator, measurable meaning something that you can evaluate or assess over a period when you're doing those goals. Attainable, right? I'm not going to lose 50 pounds in 2 months. That's not realistic, which is the next one, right? And it's not attainable either, obviously. And timely. Well, I could probably lose 10 pounds in a year, right? If I lost 1 pound a month, if I'm trying to lose weight, maybe that's again, a specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, timely goal that I would give myself. So that's really important to try to focus on. And again, here it is, journaling. Some of the most successful entrepreneurs and business owners I've ever met, it's amazing. They do this one right here, is they write down, and they're very attention to detail on what they do. I used to write them down. Now I put, again, technology, everything in my phone, just because it's just easier to streamline. But we've gone over a lot of the physical benefits of exercise. And again, here they are right here. From the Mayo Clinic last year, again, a lot of the information that we know, and this is what's astounding, this is really weird in my opinion, we know what to do, right? We know what all of the accredited institutions tell us. The ACSM, American Heart Association, they all say that we should be exercising about roughly 120 to 150 minutes a week, or in other words, 3 to 4 days a week. And again, a lot of these we will see. I'll give you some really good hints and examples of what to challenge you, what you can do when you leave out of here on your exercise regimen. But right now, the latest stats, unfortunately, we have a population in the United States of Americans that are 2/3 overweight right now as we speak. And on top of that, which is further concerning, is that about almost 40% of those people are obese, meaning they have a body mass index over 30. In other words, their body fat percentage is somewhere between 30% and more. And that's a problem, right? It just doesn't make sense. It's kind of weird. I would think the opposite. I would think that everything that we know now, who wouldn't want to do this? Who wouldn't want to eat better? Who wouldn't want to control what they're doing in a day? But having said that, even though we know these are the physical benefits, people still drink alcohol excessively, right? People still engage in recreational drugs. People still smoke. You see them. And again, we know that the stats show that it's best to avoid those detriments, right? And to live a healthier lifestyle. Yet, what the Mayo Clinic and all the others are telling us is that obesity and overweight is just going to increase in our country. It's just amazing, which it's weird because it helps me. That's job security for myself and people that are in my industry because, it keeps us employed. But what I think's lacking, and again, this is why I got into exercise psychology in the first place, we do know what to do. We do know, everybody in here knows, the mathematical formula, that if you eat less and you burn off more, what's going to happen is you're probably going to lose weight, right? Easy enough. It's so simple. But the mindset of it is what we're going to jump into today, especially in the next several slides. Why do people still do this, knowing that they can exercise and feel better, live longer, be out of pain? Who wouldn't jump at that, right? I mean, it's just common sense to us because we're smart, right? Everybody in this room. There are outliers, there's no question about it. You might know some of the cases where you hear about the healthy person like a Jim Fixx who ran marathons and ended up dying very young. But some of the genetic predispositions, like in his case, was excessive smoker before he turned his life around. Unfortunately, by that time it was too late. Then you have on the flip side, I'm sure you probably remember George Burns, comedian, lived almost to 100 roughly. I don't know if you remember this, but I always share this with us. I also teach on the side too, part-time at a university. And one of the funniest events was when he was on the Johnny Carson show. And you probably remember, some of you probably already know what I'm about to say, but it was when he was puffing a cigar, and Johnny Carson asked him, he's like, how many of those do you do a day? And he says, this is my 15th, if that gives you an idea. And again, he's like 93 when he's doing this talk with Johnny Carson. Johnny Carson asks him, what does your doctor say about that? And George Burns just says, he's dead. And, but that's just an outlier. You know, again, that's something that just doesn't add up. It's like, okay, well, that goes against what I'm saying, right? It's going to happen. Some people are lucky and blessed with genetics, right? Some people, why do people get cancer, you know, on the flip side? I mean, we can go all day long on things that don't make sense in terms of adding up. But when you look at everything in a graph, and what statistics will show is empirical research, and that's what I do now as a researcher. When you look at all of the data and you collect it totally, the correlations, especially quantitative research studies, will show that when you exercise, you will live longer, you will be in better shape, you will have physical benefits of these that are going to lead to longevity, to being able to, you know, again, you name it, fill in the blank, do what you want to do for the rest of your life. Again, for the majority, using a total of what we, you know, should expect. Having said that, though, again, we've kind of gone through this, and we've talked about the benefits of physical activity. I've asked you before, my first question was, who in here exercises? Pretty much 100% of us raised our hands, and we do something. Let me ask you this question. Everybody in this room, and be honest, please. Are you satisfied and happy with your exercise regimen that you get 100% of what you should be doing every week? I'm not going to raise my hand at all. I'll be the first to admit, no way. You know, everybody, let's face it, there's always room for improvement, right? It's the whole cliche of like, nobody's perfect, you can't, you know, but you strive to be assertive in your SMART goals, you know, as we talked about, and that'll keep you, you know, again, on that positive trajectory of being able to attain what you're trying to accomplish and achieve in those goals. So as long as you're focused, and you know, we know that the data is in there and all the research studies have been done, you also recognize that there are psychological benefits that we're talking about here. And so we'll jump into those here right now. No question about it, exercise, it does, you know, releasing endorphins, dopamine. We're going to jump into all of that, what exercise does in the brain. We see, in this country especially, we see a lot of people with, for example, cognitive decline, right? I mean, one of us in here knows somebody who has gone through some type of decline cognitively. Everybody in here knows of somebody who is not as quick and as sharp as they were, including maybe ourselves too, over time. I mean, it just happens with age. There are some myths, so to bust those myths, it's almost like some people believe, well, there's nothing I can do about it. As I age, my brain's going to shrink, I'm going to lose brain cells. That's not true, not at all. In fact, that's a terrible myth. What does cause damage to the brain is things like anxiety, depression, and then again, some of those detrimental exterior, you know, things like alcohol and drugs that we know we shouldn't be doing. And a lot of us, when we look at this list right here, what happens is, in psychology, there's something called a locus of control. Has anybody ever heard that term or familiar with locus of control? So what locus of control is that if you have an internal locus of control, if you're a highly internal locus of control person, I believe there's a correlation with type A people. I've been told I am a type A. They tend to be early, they tend to control their own fate, they tend to take accountability of their destiny, of what they're trying to do every day, pretty much. So for using the simplest example, when I teach at school, some of the students would be late to class, and they would be half an hour late, an hour late, and they would tell me, you know, it's bad traffic out there. And I would just say, really, in Atlanta? No kidding. And it's like, of course, you know, they, in that case, probably have a high external locus of control, meaning they are influenced by environmental factors that are out of their control. There's nothing they could do, you know. But like we said earlier, you probably have a high internal locus of control when you said that you would go to bed 30 minutes earlier. That's an example of taking accountability, of using what's called your intrinsic motivation, not letting an external force affect you adversely, right? And again, not to pick on the millennials or younger kids, But we've seen it, right? We've seen through life some of the younger people that have the excuses that we saw a few slides ago. And hey, I'm guilty of it too. I told you, I definitely will admit that sometimes, some of these I'll let get to myself as well. Especially with stress management. I said this earlier. Managing stress is so important. When I asked in here who has stress, it seemed like a lot of us do. Here's a question. Can you control your stress? In other words, is stress possible to manage voluntarily by your own volition? Yes, right. I see a lot of, yes, absolutely. And that's where, again, the misconception and myth comes to play, where some highly stressed people are saying, well, it's out of my hands, there's nothing I could do. And yes, there's no question, there are some things that are out of our hands. The thing that we can control is how do we react to it and how do we manage it. That's what is so important. And that's, again, working as a exercise psychologist. When I work with clients, it doesn't matter to me if they have a high external locus of control, high internal locus of control. I'm not there to change that. What I'm there to try to help, and again, you know this, you cannot change people. I mean, everybody knows that. Behavior Modification 101. What I try to do is to try to provide the tools to help them and allow them and let them know, well, here, this works for me. Maybe this might, do you get some good. I mentioned earlier, prioritizing on a calendar. I would always encourage my clients, whether they're using it on their phone or a notepad, I said, just write down, your goals for that week. Write down when we're going to meet. Write down what we need to accomplish by next week. Because again, I think what happens is that when you set yourself up to have tasks and then you meet those tasks and you can cross them out, you kind of realize that maybe your level of stress might go down, because then it's not something that's catching you off guard, right? Going back, again, the pandemic's the biggest example to use in here, because everybody was affected by that. I thought I was going to have to find a new profession first and foremost, because I'm like, well, the fitness center's going to be closed forever. What the heck am I going to do now? You can't work one-on-one with people in a setting. But the silver lining out of that was that myself, I learned that I could adjust and develop new ways to work with people, kind of like what I'm doing with right now with the way that the Fayette Senior Services has set up with the Zoom. People who couldn't make it in here, they can join via this technology. Whereas before, that might not have been available. I work with people now where I can help them remotely, that if for any reason they're traveling or they just can't make it, then all we have to do is just flip on whatever, Zoom, FaceTime, Skype, and then bam, there's our exercise session right there. Somebody in here mentioned earlier too, again, about, hey, if it's too expensive, that doesn't, and that's true. Here's another way that you can do it for free. Most people have access to Wi-Fi or, internet or what have you. You get on YouTube, you can't imagine how many free exercise classes. You fill in the blank. Yeah, I heard a lot of yes, right? Absolutely. I mean, you probably know it better than me because I don't use that, but I know of it. I have clients who've told me, and I think that's wonderful. I think that, again, the great positive benefits of technology is such that we have just everything at our hands that we can use to be able to benefit ourselves when we're working. So getting back to the depression, anxiety, and this is serious too, by the way, because we've seen the studies that have no question shown the benefits of exercise to things like depression, anxiety. Using medical doctors, for example, every time you go to the medical doctor, what I'm hoping they say to you, what I hear a lot, is if back to the physical ailments, arthritis, or I've got a lot of brain fog, or I'm really stressed, I'm not getting enough sleep. A lot of times medical doctors, what they should be saying, I hear it a lot, is, well, how's your exercise regimen? A lot of them should be saying that. I think they do. I think more and more now, because they know the studies too, they've seen the benefits that when their patients are exercising, it just makes sense that they're going to be in a better mood, better anxiety, less stress, and hopefully in a better attitude. Because attitude's everything. A lot of companies, a lot of corporations, you probably already know this too, they will pay for different technology gadgets. For example, one of my clients told me that he had a brand new Apple Watch. He showed me it this week. I was like, oh, that's pretty cool. It's like a $300 Apple Watch. And he said, yeah, I got it for free. He said, my wife's company that he works for, that she works for rather, they went ahead and bought it for her, and they told her, if you achieve X amount of steps, then we're going to also give you whatever, some other bonuses and perks. And some of us might wonder, like, why the heck would a company do that? Why would a company? Anybody in here can figure, why would they invest $300 on that employee for an Apple Watch to figure out? Yes, bingo, right, exactly, absolutely. It's what's called a return on investment, right, in their insurance premium. Because what's going to happen, probably, most likely, what we talked about before, is that that employee, especially the other ones who are engaging in the exercise, is probably not going to have as many claims and visits and sickness and illness into the doctors and such. Rather, they'll probably, since they're healthier, they're going to be on again, a journey of being able to be on that path to just staying out of the doctor's office and not getting sick and avoiding any types of injury and pain. So now when we jump into what's going on with when you exercise in your brain, and we have a lot of these big words as far as what are the neuroscientific methods and evidence of what we found. There's a neuroscientist by the name of Wendy Suzuki, and she's amazing. She's a professor of neuroscience, and she broke it down so eloquently when she talks about the neurons, going back to what the brain, when you exercise, you actually build more brain cells. When you exercise, your brain will develop more cells. And it's evident because that's what they see when they look at the brain in its diagram of the hippocampus and the prefrontal cortex. We'll see that in a little bit. It actually increases in size too. That's the great benefits of when you're exercising, especially, by the way, cardiorespiratory fitness. The medical experts, including the neuroscientists I just referred to, yes, strength training is important, no question. The anaerobic that we referenced to, the bicep curls and squats and strength training, but to increase size of things like hippocampus and prefrontal cortex and also build the neurons and neuro brain cells in the body and in the brain, the way to do it is cardiorespiratory endurance, meaning power walking, jogging, bicycling. Peachtree City, it's amazing living here. I can't believe how many times I see people walking their dog, yet they're not walking them, they're driving in their golf cart and just pulling their dog. I just don't understand that. There's got to be a good reason for that, but if anything, the one positive, I'm like, well, at least the dog's getting exercise, but golf carting would not count as physical activity or exercise in that case. But there's a lot of things that we can do, and that's the good news about the neuroplasticity. In other words, the malleability, the flexibility. The brain is like a muscle. It really is. And that's the cool thing, because you know that when you do a bicep curl, you're breaking down muscle fibers. And it sounds counterproductive. It's like, I'm breaking down muscle fibers. That doesn't sound good. What it does, though, is that it increases those bicep fibers. And as you already know this, it increases the strength. It prevents things like osteoporosis, osteopenia, sarcopenia. And that's why when you have stronger muscles, hence you'll have stronger joints, ligaments, tendons. And that's the same thing what's going on with the brain. The more you challenge your brain by doing exercise, the more the brain's going to benefit scientifically. Neuroscience, it's neurochemistry. It's like, for example, when you are doing, let's just say, me again, my example. I like to do treadmill a lot, and I like to watch something like a TV show. And what's amazing, or if you like to listen to podcasts, some people that I know, you actually retain that information sharper when you're walking versus if I was just sitting there on my couch and just being sedentary and watching it and just zoned out. What's happening is when you are moving and those neurons and those cells are moving around, it gives time to promote blood flow, circulation, and blood to the brain so that you can retain that information. That's the cool thing about, by the way, brain exercises, because not only does it help with short-term function, because evidence has suggested that when you exercise, you will have approximately 2 hours of increased memory and brain function and cognitive abilities. In addition to that, though, what the great thing is that you will have long-term memory increase as well, and long-term cognitive benefits too. I mentioned this a few minutes ago. I said that it was a myth that your brain degenerates just over time as we age. That's totally false. What the great thing is, though, we know that, yes, there are people who have cognitive decline, dementia, Alzheimer's. Right now, the statistic is approximately 6.5 million people in America have Alzheimer's, right? 75% of the people over 70 years old have Alzheimer's. And what's happening, and we know people are living longer, so when we live longer, we probably have a propensity to develop some type of cognitive problem like that. But exercise, it can't cure it. We know that, people with Parkinson's and such, they haven't had studies that have suggested, hey, we found it. Exercise, it cures and treats conditions like that. What it does, and you've heard this, I'm sure, but it will kind of blockade it. It'll give an obstacle to those different types of degenerative diseases so that it can't affect it that negatively quite yet. So in other words, think of it like armor all that you're putting on when you're exercising. The professor of the neuroscience, Suzuki, had mentioned, I like her example. I love this, that she talks about when you exercise, it's like developing a 401k for your brain. It's like a long-term investment in your brain. You really, and you again, back to me for a second with what I like to listen to a lot of times on my off time and for interests are financial podcasts. I'm a big Dave Ramsey guy. I don't know if anybody in here's heard of him or seen Dave Ramsey. I've called in his show on his radio program about 13 years ago when I became debt-free. I've been to his events. My dad taught for him up in Nashville. And so I have a great affinity and love for the subject matter of financial health. And a lot of times what they'll use on correlations, excuse me, pollen, is your health is your wealth. In other words, that's the cliche. And I love one of the examples that Dave Ramsey used, just to steal something that he put up on a chart. He put a 21-year-old, and some of us, I don't know if we've seen this, in a 22-year-old, and put the same investment in at that age. This 21-year-old started with the same amount of money of, like, let's say $100 a month of investment all the way to retirement. And then a 22-year-old put same exact thing, $100 a month for retirement. When you looked at retirement age, whether it was 65, 70, do you think there was just a slight little difference between those, or do you think there was a great big gap? There was a chasm, between the 21 and 22. It was astounding. And it's the same thing with exercise. I'm a big believer in that. And again, if a 21-year-old and 22-year-old, apples to apples, they start doing the same exercise in their neurochemistry of their brain function, what would they look like at the end? I believe it's the same type of investment, but the great news is that it's never too late. It doesn't matter what age we are. We can start this today, right now. I asked, who in here is 100% on and doesn't, if you were, we probably wouldn't be in this room right now. We need to listen to what I'm talking about. But what we know is that the information we have that we can retain and do with it, then it's all coming down to motivation. I mean, motivation is so key, and I'm going to really jump into that too as we really, come to what we're talking about here. A lot of times, I mentioned this, that people know what to do, but yet they don't execute on the program. And a lot of times what happens in the brain is that there are those excuses that come into the brain that talk about, well, yeah, okay, I know that this is important, that I know I need to do my physical activity for the day, but I would rather, fill in the blank, anything that's not as conducive to one's health and optimizing it. And that's what happens. And so with exercise, what people need to realize and learn, and again, me included, is that it's an investment. The more we put into it now, you're nurturing growth. You are basically putting into your body good fuel. And again, a lot of that, yes, in terms of eating healthy, that's for sure important. We're talking about right now is your cardiorespiratory endurance exercises, your strength training, your flexibility, just anything that you could do to build the body so that your physical fitness is at its best. And again, I mentioned this, we can do this today. I mean, when we come to the last slide, I'm going to tell you what my challenge to everybody in here is. And a big part of it too is relationships. This is so important too. I wanted to touch on this just for a second. Whether or not you're doing a group class, personal trainer, getting together with a group of people. I know Atlanta has different, and in Peachtree City, there's groups where they're free. You get together and you go for power walks and such. And I think that that's so important because as humans, psychologically, we weren't meant to do what we did in the first few months of COVID and just sit there at home and be quarantined and isolated. That is not good at all for mental health. Not to go off a tangent, but if you see the studies of what happened in the last 3 years, of anxiety, suicide rate, depression skyrocketed, and they blame it on the pandemic. And I firmly believe it's because we were kept away from each other. Humans were meant to do what we're doing right now. We were meant to congregate, to communicate with each other, to help each other. that's how business works, right? In the real world, it's team building. And so you need that psychological stimulation when you're meeting with people. One of the examples that it said a few slides ago was, well, I'm intimidated by people, or I'm a loner. That's fine. Again, totally no problem. There are people who are introverts, and that's totally, there's no problem at all, with that as well. They can go on YouTube, or they can go on a Peloton and see that there's a whole bunch of people out there who can't see them and do their exercise, just fine with them. For the most people, that relationship building is so key and so important. So as we're moving on to the next slides, I got another challenge. Let's do another exercise. Let's do another sit to stand, okay? 2 of them in a row. Can anybody do 2 sit to stands up and down? All right. I see 1. I see 2. How does that feel, everybody? Yes, that's good. The reason why I thought that's so important, again, is to break the ice and to get our blood flow going, to get the neurotransmitters working, and to just say, okay, now I'm retaining the information. This is important. And what's happening with the brain is, you have all of the levels of hormones that are the good hormones that are increased, something known as BDNF. This is so important. They call it the brain fertilizer. And what it is that it's components that the brain is building, and it feeds off on some of the things that battle things like stress and anxiety and mood and attitude. And then what it could reduce is some of the adverse cortisol or adrenaline as well, too. So when we have times of, again, a lot of stress, people are going to their doctors and therapists and such. A lot of times the source of the problem, the therapists and the doctors usually have in their prescription, how much exercise are you getting? That's so important. That is no question about it, that's something that everybody should be able to get better on in terms of improving.
Is adrenaline a bad thing?
No, not at all. No. Adrenaline's actually could be good. I've heard great examples of when adrenaline is very helpful. Stress is not a bad thing, I think. I think that it's the reaction of the adrenaline in our case, or the reaction of dopamine or what have you. The cortisol, on the other hand, this is your stress hormone right here. This is the hormone that goes mostly to the belly fat. And so that's why a lot of times with exercise, that's so important for us men, because the body fat is so close to the heart. And so we have to make sure that that's decreased as well. But yeah, good question as far as.
One exercise better than the other? I'm very about sitting in the bed and doing the exercise.
Yeah.
Going out walking, is that different?
Somebody mentioned that earlier in the presentation. The question was, is one exercise better than the other? Somebody had mentioned that you can be in the bed and moving the legs. My answer to my clients, what's the best exercise? Is the bike better? Is the rower better? Is the swimming better? My answer to that is the exercise that's best is the one that you're going to do. And I always say that. I mean, I know it sounds like, well, that's not really helpful. But what I'm saying is that a lot of times people will get turned off, back to those excuses to try to help answer that question. Some people might say, well, I don't like to be in a group of people. I don't like to go to the gym. They're too expensive. I don't like, you name it. What do you like? And that's what they have to kind of figure out. When working with clients, I have clients who have told me that they've tried it. They'll say, I don't like to get wet. I don't like to get in the water. I'm like, well, don't swim. That's not a good exercise for you then. That's my answer to them, because I don't think that they have to change that. I don't think that, here's a better way of answering your question. I don't think that anybody's missing out on anything if they choose one exercise over the other, if that makes sense. In other words, if you were to tell me and say, well, I really like walking, I'd say that's awesome, go for it, because walking is one of the best exercises for brain, but also for our entire health. But I'm not running, big deal. I don't run either. I'm not a runner. Running, I've got a bad back, and a lot of people have bad knees, my wife included. And running is one of the things that doctors are telling us is one of the worst things to do. I went about 2 years ago and had major back reconstructive rehabilitation through a physical therapist because I thought I was going to have back surgery. And I asked the therapist, I said, when they fixed me, they showed me all the perfect things to do. I said, I feel great. Can I start running? And they were like, no. They said, do not run. And it's not because it's not good for you. It's not good for me because of my back issues. Running can be counterintuitive on some people. If, again, my wife, using her as an example, her knees. And so the best exercise for me, I like power walking because power walking proportionally burns the most body fat percentage. A lot of people don't know that. A lot of people say, I thought you have to run to burn more body fat. No. When you power walk, you burn more fat than you do proportionally carbohydrates, right? You might burn more calories total when you're running, sure. Those real fit people who run, no question about it. But a lot of them are not interested in the percentage of burning more fat. At that point, they're burning mostly carbohydrates, but they're building their cardiorespiratory endurance. The great thing about walking, and especially power walking too, my answer to that would be get your heart rate up to at least 60 to 70% of the maximum heart rate. Because we know that if we do a slow walk, that's still better than nothing. But the best exercise to do with walking, and this goes for anything else, by the way, too, is to get that heart rate up, to really get what they call HIIT level, like high intensity interval training, meaning you're going back and forth between the heart rate and up and down in intervals between getting your heart rate and your blood pressure and everything moving, because that's so important. But very good question, though. Yeah, I mean, does that help with... I would just say, what do you like to do? And just choose those exercises and stick to them. That's my best answer to that. Mm-hmm.
So how do you know what your high intensity level is?
Oh, good question. Okay, how do you know what your percentage, I mentioned maximum heart rate level is. There's a short calculation you could do. You don't even need a calculator for this one. You could take 220, the number 220 minus your age, right? And that is, for most people, that's called the Carbonin formula equation of finding out what our maximum heart rate is. So using myself for an example, 220 minus 44 would be about 176. 176 for a 44-year-old would be about my 100%. If I went out here and went for a full-on sprint and I ran, then that would be my 100% number. I don't want to get to 176 beats per minute. That wouldn't do me any good. I want to get, like I said, to about 70 to 80% in my case of 176 beats per minute. So that's where I would need a calculator. That's probably where it'd be like, I don't know, 130, 140 beats per minute is what I should be aiming for optimal cardiorespiratory. A lot of the machines, if you go to the gyms with the treadmills, they'll have a little chart there that'll show the graph where it says like 65 to 80%. But all of the information on that, if you just do a simple Google search and just type in, they'll calculate everything out specifically for you right there. So that's that range that you want to be in. When you're doing your power walking, swimming, jogging, biking, whatever you're doing.
Like you're saying, you go high level.
Right.
Because that's where you get the best benefit.
Exactly. Yes. Right. Mm-hmm.
How long to maintain.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then start again.
Absolutely. I would say like do 5 minutes at the peak, do 5 minutes at this part, and just keep doing that for at least 30, 40 minutes. I think that's so important and crucial because, again, a lot of times what happens when people get into their exercise routines and they get kind of stagnant and they realize that they're not losing weight or they're not even feeling better, like what is going on? They almost become immune because they're doing the same thing. We see that a lot too. We see a lot of people coming to the gym or just doing the same routine and they're not changing. It's really important to again, I'm kind of going backwards here. I said to keep doing the exercise that works for you, but also it is important to shock it sometimes too, that muscle memory. You don't want the body to become immune too much to what you're doing too many times.
Power walk that you're speaking of, can you accomplish the same outcome on a stationary bike?
I would think so, yeah. So the question is, can you get the similar question to what was asked just a few seconds ago about can you get the same benefits from doing like a power walking as a stationary bike or vice versa? On a stationary bike, you are sitting, and most likely you're not doing anything with your arms. You're sitting and you're still cycling with your legs, which is beneficial. However, you are moving more when you're doing this versus sitting on a bike. Having said that, I think there's nothing wrong with a bike, but if it was my choice, if you can do the walking or the elliptical, the elliptical is like a standing bicycle. The reason why I tell my clients to do an elliptical versus a bike, if they can, is because it's promotion of the entire body moving, and therefore you're probably going to be burning more calories that way. And so again, but having said that, but I really like biking. I would say, no, go ahead, do the biking. But what I would challenge then is when you're on the bike, grab a pair of 2-pound or 3-pound dumbbells and do this. Or no dumbbells at all. Just do this with your arms. Swing them across. That way, while you're on there, everything's moving. I'm a big advocate of move the entire body as much as possible. You'll hear that from me a lot. Yeah, so does that help? This is one of the last slides in terms of the brain function, what's going on here. We talked earlier about one of my notes that I wanted to make sure I got across. Right, yeah. So the BDNF, brain-derived neurotropic function. What's happening here in this Venn diagram, when you're looking at what the brain is benefiting from, the residual results, when you exercise, everything happens in these Venn diagrams where they intersect right here to the cognitive function of mood and so forth. So you can see some of how it's broken up. You have norepinephrine, serotonin, and then you have your dopamine. Those in the previous slide were the elements of those hormones of what it's promoting. And yeah, again, to answer a previous question about adrenaline, that is so important as well too, because adrenaline can be a beneficial tool that people can use. A lot of performance athletes do that with performance anxiety. If they have that and they have that adrenaline built up, they can use that as a good weapon, so to speak, to help them out. And so when they come together and intersect, when you have the brain working hard through the exercise, I mentioned this earlier, that the brain promotes movement. That's its primary function. But the movement helps the brain. And that's why that's so important with improving mood and anxiety and everything else. The PowerPoint picture here is a good example of, this is the question, what should I be doing? You know, what is my next step? My challenge to you is to look at this, and just, here's an easy acronym to remember. It's called the FIT principle. Look at how often, how hard or how resistant the exercise is, how long you're doing it, and what type of exercise you're doing. You asked some excellent questions. Everybody in here was asking some great questions about, well, what about this mode? You know, what about this type of exercise? And again, this pyramid is great in terms of answering, well, here's what we should be doing. At the bottom here, this should be the most every day. Mowing the lawn, vacuuming without the auto push, thing. Just doing things manually so that we're working more with our body. Here you see that the respiratory activities are bigger than the strength activities. They only gave a little section here of the anaerobic exercises. These are aerobic ones. This was important. We didn't touch flexibility so much, but that's a whole nother PowerPoint that could be talked about because stretching is so important and crucial as well. Does anybody in here do stretching or yoga, things like that? I would highly suggest, if you get a chance, again, go on YouTube. You can get some free yoga training right there that are excellent. My parents, they're big in Tai Chi. Anybody Tai Chi in here at all? That's the newest craze right now. I think it's wonderful. And then again, it says cut down on this stuff right here. What's going on with Netflix binging and all of the stuff that iPad. First thing that people do now, and again, I have to work on this myself. When you wake up in the morning, grab the phone, and then even in traffic, you have the phone and a red light or whatever, and it's just too much. One of the sickest things, and I'm sure you've seen it as well, is when we go out to dinner and you order your meal, and then you see the family of four. The kids, what are they doing? They're like this, right? Because they're all doing that. And that's terrible. And there's a whole nother tangent on that as well with the blue light phenomena of what's going on with the effects of that. That's almost as dangerous, or maybe if not more dangerous to some of these recreational drugs, the adverse effects of things like cocaine and heroin. What's happening is it's affecting some of those neurological, like dopamine and serotonin. When you're sedentary and you're fixated on those tablets or those objects, it's really decreasing our brain function, and that is really scary. That is what I'm really afraid of, what could happen in the future. So these are some of the good references that I would suggest. My take on references, by the way, I'll just throw this out here. Please take a grain of salt if we ever see like a yahoo.com said, oh, it doesn't matter what we eat, we should just exercise, or CBS Online said that you could just watch your eating, but you don't need exercise. Just please be careful. Empirical research articles from established journals, in my opinion, are the way to go. And again, that's partly what I do. I mentioned that earlier. So again, some questions were asked really, really wonderfully earlier. I think we're almost at time, but I want to leave a few minutes right now just to kind of do a little Q&A summary here. Any questions at all about what we've covered in the last hour?
If you are doing 10,000 steps a day and you can allow it, then you aren't doing power walking.
Yeah, I think that's wonderful. Yeah, 10,000 steps a day is excellent. That's a great metric to aim for. Absolutely. That is a lot of activity. If you can get 10,000 a day, that's a really good goal. Anybody in here wear one of those, the pedometers, or have? Yeah, the watch. Perfect. Yeah. Good question, though. Yes, sir.
You have a pacemaker, you still get a hit of your heart going up and down?
Good question. My answer to that, defer to the medical doctor first and find out. I'm going to assume that they're going to tell you to ask yourself in your head how you feel when you're going about 70-80% of your maximum heart rate. My cautious answer to that is, whatever the doctor says, usually medical doctors concur with exercise programs, that with a pacemaker, I think you'll be fine in getting out there for a brisk jog, a good swim, or whatever you're doing. It shouldn't affect anything adversely. So I'm a big advocate of saying, well, first the medical doctor, we defer to what they say. But at the same point, I believe that they're going to concur that, yes, you can definitely, without doubt, do HIIT exercises. You could probably even do cross training. You know, some of those crazy Insanity and P90X, some of those things are even too wild for me. But anything that's going to challenge your intensity level and resistance, I would absolutely say yes, definitely you can go for sure. Good question. Yeah, absolutely. I promised you a gift at the beginning, didn't I? I think I did. So as I mentioned, now that we're wrapping up, if there's anybody online too, if they're still watching, you feel free. I'll give you one of these as well. I just wanted to share with you. I mentioned earlier in the presentation how important relatedness development was with people. What this is that I'm handing out to everybody, it's a peer-reviewed journal that tells you about the benefits of working out and exercising with others. And what this journal is from is National University. It's called the Journal of Performance Psychology. And in a nutshell, it's from a study that I basically wrapped up about 2 years ago. Thanks. And what it is, it's kind of the short version of my published dissertation. And so what I did was I reached out to the Journal of Performance Psychology. There we are. And I had said that we have found some qualitative good data. So again, I mentioned that's so important to me. I believe that when you have the results and they're published and they're peer-reviewed, that's what's to go by. So if you want my short 30-second version of what that journal is, it's basically saying, yes, it is very beneficial to work out with others, and here's why. It cuts down on injury prevention. It helps up build the relatedness, relationship, determination between each other. It builds on intrinsic motivation, and it helps accountability and consistency. All those words I just threw out, those are so important. It kind of answers the why. Why do we exercise? Yes, ma'am. Exactly, and that's in there. Very good. You've read this too, haven't you? Yeah, absolutely. So I want to thank you all. This was such a pleasure. I really appreciate your time coming here. Thank you for your engagement, and it was truly a treat to meet with you. And if you have any questions following up, I'm a big, I believe in the power of networking with each other too. So on the way out, if you need my email, my phone number, it's at the nearest table on the exit there. If anything didn't make sense, if you want a copy of the PowerPoint, I'd be happy to email it to you too, or anything else. So I want to thank you for your time and giving me the forum to do this. I really appreciate it. So it's so nice to meet all of you. Thank you. Appreciate it. Well, y'all have a great, wonderful rest of the weekend, and happy Palm Sunday, happy Passover, happy Easter to everybody in here too. So, all right, thank you. Hope to see you all soon too. Bye-bye.